We have Kelly Morrow here. She is a registered dietitian nutritionist and fellow of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. She has been on the faculty at Bastyr University since 2002, where she has supervised clinical rotations at the Bastyr Center for Natural Health and taught in the departments of education and exercise science, naturopathic medicine, midwifery, and acupuncture and East Asian medicine. Kelly has been in private practice since 2000 and has previously worked at Evergreen Hospital in radiation oncology, the Booth Gardner Parkinson Center, and in community health promotions. As a nutrition educator, Kelly helps people learn about how foods affect health. As a nutrition counselor, she helps people with motivation and making sustainable changes while supporting personal preferences, lifestyle, and culture. Kelly uses an integrative, body-positive, gender-affirming, and non-diet approach. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to present this information today. And I've been a dietitian for about 24 years, and I've worked with a lot of different conditions. And I started out working in Parkinson's, and now I'm more intensively working with people with Parkinson's. Again, I work at Seattle Integrative Medicine in Seattle with Lori Mishley. Some of you are aware of Lori Mishley's work and her studies around diet and lifestyle factors that are associated with people who have slower progression of Parkinson's. So I'm going to share some of that information with you today, and also talk about some of kind of the practical ways to apply that information, and hopefully leave a little bit of time in the end for some questions. All right. Does everything look good, Eden? Okay, good. This is my contact information. If you have questions in the future, or you can message me at Seattle Integrative Medicine, and my phone number is here too. So the roadmap, the topics that I wanted to cover today, looking at those key foods associated with brain protection, and also that have an association with slower progression of Parkinson's. Reviewing some of the nutritional strategies for managing side effects of Parkinson's disease and some of the medications. And then also what are some practical meal planning and preparation techniques that integrate and incorporate some of those brain protective foods. Some of you might already be aware of Dr. Mishley's work, and she is continually updating her data and putting them into beautiful formats so that they're really easily understandable. So Dr. Mishley has been following close to 2,000 people for over 10 years and looking at the people who are progressing the fastest and the slowest. And so she's come up with dietary and lifestyle factors that are associated with both. And this particular image gives us not only the foods that are associated with faster and slower progression, but also the confidence level. So how confident are we that these are related? So with these types of studies, we're looking at associations. So it doesn't mean that it's causing Parkinson's to progress faster. And we can't prove that it is any one thing is causing it to progress faster or slower. But we're just noticing these associations, constellations of habits and foods that people who are living longer, healthier with Parkinson's, what they're doing. And so we're using that data to say, well, if you're emulating this, can we change the progression of your Parkinson's? It's ongoing research, and none of it's harmful. So if you're eating more fresh fruits and vegetables, there's very few instances that would be harmful for you. Nuts and seeds, coconut oil, and red wine. So those are the foods that are the most commonly associated with people who are progressing more slowly. Some people might kind of raise an eyebrow at the red wine. And I would say if you're not drinking alcohol, I wouldn't start drinking alcohol. But this is where those associations come in. So many times when people are eating more of, say, a Mediterranean type dietary pattern, where they are eating more vegetables and fruits and fish and nuts and seeds, many times that goes along with having some red wine. So it might be an association, but it's one that comes up frequently. Red wine also has lots of what we call phytonutrients that are very protective for the brain and the cardiovascular system and the heart and all of that. So it could be that wine is important, but we're not at the place where we'd say we recommend you start drinking wine if you're not having wine. And we still recommend moderation. Fresh herbs and spices, olive oil, beans, and fish also have a very strong correlation with people that are progressing more slowly. Green tea is another one. And then some foods, some of these might be familiar or not, things like millet, quinoa, eggs, and soy foods. So these are the foods that people are eating with the slowest progression in Lori Mischley's cohort of people in her study. The foods that are associated with faster progression are in this dark orange box. So we see soda, fried food, canned fruit, ice cream, milk, beef, and chicken. We also see cheese, butter, yogurt, frozen vegetables, and then also pork, bread, pasta, and canned vegetables. There's lots of conversations that we could have around some of these different foods. And some people say, I don't understand why yogurt would show up. And the reason is that dairy products are associated with Parkinson's disease. It's something you can find in the mainstream literature that people who are eating more dairy products seem to have more risk of Parkinson's. It's not the only thing, but it has that association. And then in Dr. Mischley's research, she finds that people who are eating more dairy products, even if they seem healthy like yogurt, it is part of the association. So we typically recommend people minimize dairy products as much as possible. And I think it's important to work with a dietitian around that if you're going to be changing your diet and say dairy is a big part of your diet because there's aspects of nutrition associated with dairy, like protein and bone support nutrients. So we want to make sure that you're nourished. And one of the things that Dr. Mischley always says is, I'm just the messenger. So she's just reporting on these associations. Some of them are probably not surprising, things like soda or ice cream. And so foods that are more highly processed, especially foods that come in a can. And some of the conversation or thought process around that is that canned foods might have something in them, like some of the metals or some of the plastics that line cans that might be associated with neurological progression of disease. The other thing that shows up in her research is that people who are having a hard time affording food or affording healthcare have faster progression. And so many times when people are having trouble affording food, they might eat more canned food. And so maybe that association is more with poverty or people who are struggling financially. So it's hard to say, but we generally recommend trying to minimize the amount of canned and processed foods that you eat. When it comes to things like red meat, chicken, pork, so more of a plant-based diet where you're eating the fresh fruits and vegetables, the beans, the fish, we try to steer people more towards those foods. It doesn't mean don't ever eat chicken, don't ever eat beef, but what we want to see is a preponderance or more of those foods that are protective so that they overshadow the ones that are associated with faster progression. There's also other aspects of of lifestyle that are really important as well. And so social interaction shows up as being a very powerful predictor or association with slow progression. And then also physical activity. So when you find yourself really focusing in and saying, oh my gosh, I eat chicken, that's something that's pretty reliable for me. Is that making my Parkinson's progress? Let's take a step back and say, okay, well, if you're eating chicken, are you also eating all of these other nourishing foods that are associated with slower progression? Are you engaging socially? Are you physically active? Are you taking care of yourself in many ways? That probably is protective. And so we want to keep it in perspective. And I recommend focusing on the green boxes or the green circles so that you can get more of those in your diet. So as I mentioned, there are a few other things that are important. So cooking your own food does seem to be one of the food behaviors that shows up as being protective. And I think part of that is when you cook your own food, you have more control over the ingredients that go in. So you might use better oils like olive oil. You might use better quality carbohydrates with more fiber. So cooking your own food is associated with slower progression. Eating a mostly plant-based diet. So that means more legumes, more nuts and seeds, more vegetables and fruits. Eating those types of foods seems to be protective. Buying organic as much as possible. There's definitely a connection between pesticides and Parkinson's disease. And so having foods with lower pesticide content is likely protective. And then eating with others. And I think that has to do with the social aspect of protection, essentially, that when you're social, it engages your brain in many ways and is helpful. Let's go into detail with a few of these different topics. Making the case for cooking. So many people that I talk with don't really cook very much. And I think it's because it's become really easy to not cook. We can eat out, we can get takeout, we can buy foods that are frozen or processed that we can heat up. And the more that we outsource our meals, the less control we have of some of the ingredients. And so fresh food is clearly associated with slower progression of Parkinson's. And having that recognition could be the first step if you're not used to cooking. Cooking does not need to be complicated. You don't have to make like basil soup and, some fancy, salad with 30 ingredients in it. It can be a very, very simple meal. It can be some fish with some sweet potatoes and some green beans. So it doesn't have to be complicated. And if you feel like you don't have the skills to make food taste the way you want it to taste, I recommend doing cooking classes. You can take them online or you can find a local resource for that. But improving your skills could be a really worthy thing to do to help you to improve your ability to cook your food at home. Using adaptive equipment, I'll show you a few of the ones that I often recommend if you're having any trouble with chopping or any of the, any dexterity. If that's difficult for you, there are quite a few kitchen devices that can be helpful. And then also just shifting your mindset. So sometimes people will say to me, if I really think about it, if I'm going to go get takeout, that's probably going to take me about 30 to 45 minutes. And if I make food, I can make a healthy meal within that amount of time. So really sort of shifting your mindset away from it doesn't have to be complicated. I can make something quickly. Whatever it is that feels like a barrier, to examine that. And as I mentioned, keep it simple. It doesn't need to be fancy. Here are some of the adaptive devices that sometimes I recommend people get to make cooking easier. I'm a huge fan of crock pots, especially this time of year for people who are living in colder climates. It's the perfect time to have a crock pot. And I always say you can put your ingredients in the crock pot and then the crock pot makes your dinner for you by the end of the day. So it's a great way to go. An air fryer is also excellent. I recommend if you use something like an air fryer or like a panini press, that you buy ones that are stainless steel that don't have the nonstick coatings, because those have some chemicals in them that can leach into your foods. So finding nonstick or the PFAS free versions. So those are those chemicals found in Teflon. So you can find like Green Pan or other ones that are chemical free. You can even put that into your search. There's a lot of different types of garlic presses and herb presses. So this one is pretty convenient. You just sort of push down and rock on it, but there's also the ones that you can squeeze. These types of choppers are really handy. And then this is one that I find a lot of people like. where you basically just put the food on this tray, you hit the top of it and it chops it. It will also slice food as well. So if you're having any trouble with dexterity, this is a great way to prepare some of your foods. Let's talk about pesticides. There are some really great lists out there. You might have heard of the Environmental Working Group, which is a nonprofit organization out of Washington, D.C. They publish data and lists about foods that are the highest and the lowest in pesticides. They also publish sunscreen and like skincare, personal care products with the least amount of chemicals. They have a lot of resources, and I highly recommend their website. But the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15 are such a classic resource. And what they're doing is talking about and listing the produce that has the highest and lowest level of pesticide residue. So you can see here, we're starting with the Dirty Dozen. So these are the 12 and actually added a few more down here. So things like spinach, strawberries, kale, grapes, apples, nectarines, peppers, cherries, peaches, tomatoes, celery, pears, potatoes, blueberries, and cherry tomatoes. These have the highest pesticide residue. So if you're going to buy these, I highly recommend that you buy them organic. And then some of the produce with the least amount of pesticide would be things like avocados. Yay for avocados. You don't necessarily have to buy organic. Sweet corn, pineapple, onions, papaya, peas, asparagus, honeydew melon, kiwi, cabbage, mushrooms, cantaloupe, mango, watermelon, and sweet potatoes. So these have very little pesticide residue. And so if you weren't able to find them organic, you could buy them conventional. One of the reasons why we think that phytonutrients or that fruits and vegetables are so protective is because they contain phytonutrients or phytochemicals, another term that you might hear is bioactive compound. And these are compounds in plant-based foods that are different than the protein and the vitamins and the minerals. These are actually compounds that make up the color, the flavor compounds, the aromas, and also found in the fiber of plant-based foods. So in general, phytonutrient foods are typically very brightly colored. Although there are some like onions and garlic that have lots of phytonutrients that are not that colorful, but they do have a very strong smell, right? So anything of the very strong smell, you're probably already thinking of all the different herbs and spices. You could think about foods that might stain your clothing, right? Like you wouldn't want to drop a cherry on your white pants, right? Or blueberries, right? Think about if you smashed a blueberry on your countertop, it would stain that. So those are very, very rich in these phytonutrients. And these phytonutrients do so many things within our bodies. They can bind to our cells and they can communicate within our cells. And one of the most powerful things that they do is they send a signal in, almost like they're calling in and going, everything's okay here. We don't need to have any inflammation. So calming down inflammation is probably one of the most powerful things that they do. Some of them can cross the blood-brain barrier and they can calm down that process as well. So if there's that inflammatory process that's associated with Parkinson's, it seems to be protective and helps to calm that down. So they act as antioxidants. They help to turn down inflammation. They can help protect our cells. So sometimes cells might die if they have too many negative influences on them. So they can calm that process down. So they can keep our cells alive. They can help with our liver, with getting rid of things we might have been exposed to that might be inflammatory or harmful. They can help grow new connections between the cells in our brain and other body tissues. And they also might be helpful for reducing the tangles of that alpha-synuclein, that protein that's associated with Parkinson's. So eating more of these phytonutrients, if there's any one thing that you take away from this, I would say try to get as many of these sources into your diet as possible. So this is a list from the Institute for Functional Medicine that goes through all of the different colors. So we can see, red, orange, yellow, green, purple, white, right? So all of these phytonutrients and all of the things they do, they not only protect the brain, but many of them protect against cancer and heart disease and other things. So we can see some of these different compounds you might have heard of before or not, like epigallocatechin is found in green tea, resveratrol in green grapes and also red wine, curcumin in turmeric, genistein is found in soy, naringin is found in oranges. So we see lots of different compounds that are protective. And I think it would be great to consider how many colors that you have on your plate, all naturally occurring colors, of course. The other thing that is associated with faster progression is eating highly processed foods. And I wanted to spend just a moment talking about processing of foods, because I think sometimes people get confused that anything that comes out of a box or a container would be bad or would be a processed food that's not worth eating. And that's not true. What we're really talking about is the difference between minimally processed and ultra processed. So for instance, you know, this here is one of the things I recommend a lot, which is red lentil pasta. And you can look at the ingredient list down here. I'm circling it at the bottom. It's red lentil flour, and that's the only ingredient. So that is what we would call minimally processed. A highly processed food is this example in the middle here, where a lot of it you can identify as foods, but there are some things that you would never have in your kitchen. And so, you know, unbleached wheat flour, yes, that's something that you might have in your kitchen. It does list the vitamins that are in it because it's enriched. It says rye, ground corn, brown rice, right? Like these sound like foods, but then we might have like, you know, wheat gluten, maybe not, datum, monoglycerides, monocalcium phosphate, right? Like some of these are things we just wouldn't have in our kitchen. And so highly processed food is probably going to have, you know, some recognizable ingredients, but probably some things that we just wouldn't have around. And then an ultra processed food over here, you would read that ingredient list and you would have absolutely no idea what it is. So I'm curious if anyone might have an idea what this particular food is. So it's sugar, corn syrup, hydrogenated palm kernel oil, citric acid, tapioca, dextrin, artificial flavors and colors, blue number 4, you know, whatever, 5, right? Who knows what that might be? Is there any way to identify that? Maybe if you want to use the chat box, I'll just see what people say about that. So blue M&Ms, nope. All right, I'll tell you, it's Skittles. So there's like, with an ultra processed food, you would pretty much not have any idea what it was. And so trying to get more minimally processed foods will be, we're thinking is more protective. And it probably makes sense. So here's another way to think about the impact of these different types of food processing and how it might impact your health. I think of the body as this really sophisticated computer. So computers process information. And so that's what our body does. We're taking in information through our senses. The food that we eat is also information. And the food that we eat could also be thought of as software programs that we run in our computer. So what kind of programs are you running in your computer? Are you running programs that are really simple and have this kind of resonance with your body, that your body knows what it is? Or are there ingredients and things in the foods that your body is like, I have no idea what to do with this. This is something artificial. And it basically takes energy for your body to figure out what to do with it, which can potentially slow down your computer and make your computer not work optimally. So think about those ultra processed and sometimes highly processed foods as being like garbled information. Your body can handle some of it, but if you can do more of the whole foods, your body is going to operate a lot better. Here are a few more ways to define minimally processed foods. You could ask this to the food that you're going to eat. Can I identify each ingredient as a food? So here we have, these are dried apples. So here at the bottom, you can see apples and cinnamon. To me, I know exactly what that is. I don't even need to look at the front of the package. I know what's going to be in there. versus these Jolly Ranchers. Again, I have no idea what that is, right? Can I identify each ingredient as a food? Does this food have all of its original parts, or has anything been missing or been removed? Does each ingredient have an identity? So is it tied to a region, a season, or a culture? Does it have the capacity to break down or spoil? One of my professors, when I was in college, said, if a food keeps, you should throw it away. And I think that's a pretty good motto to go by. And would your ancestors recognize this as food? These are all questions you can ask to your food if you're not sure if you're eating a processed food. That being said, in reality, most of us are not able to cook and prepare everything from scratch, and that's not expected. And there's lots of great options out there for very minimally processed foods that are available and convenient. I'm going to be providing you with a list of some convenience foods. I know that some of them might be more regionally available, but at least it gives you an idea of some things that I went to a few grocery stores here in Seattle with a couple of my students from Bastyr, and we came up with some lists of things that we found that were more in that minimally processed realm. But in general, you can find things like salad dressings and marinades. So if you have some of those on hand, you could make something very simple and use that to help give it a little flavor. There are some heat meat meals. You can see some examples here of some of the brands that are like Purple Carrot and Forks Over Knives, and they'll have very minimally processed ingredients. Some grain products and cereals, like you could get frozen brown rice, for example. That might be an easy one to help you get some more whole grains. Legumes and beans. Again, there's conversations about, is it better to not have it in a can or to get it in a pouch or a jar? If you can find it not in a can, that's great. But I would say it's better to eat beans. It's great to cook your own beans. If you can't cook your own beans, I think it's better to eat canned beans than to not eat beans. There's lots of dairy alternatives that are really great, lots of different types of snacks, even some sweets that are more minimally processed. And those are all going to be on that handout I give you. When you're looking at the label, another thing you can look at, these are the ingredients that are potentially the most problematic. This is for processed foods and sometimes also when you're eating in restaurants, the quality of the carbohydrates. So we want to try to look for whole grains. If we're getting refined grains, those are more shelf-stable, but they're not going to give us balanced blood sugar and energy. They don't give us the fiber that helps nourish the gut and the microbiome. And we know for many people with Parkinson's, there's a lot of digestive issues. So trying to find whole grains is really important. You can look at, for this label, many whole grain products will have this yellow label to identify that there are whole grains. You can also look at the nutrition label and look to see if there's fiber. If it says 0 or 1, you can do better. So for breads, I would say, can you find at least 3 to 5 grams of fiber per slice? That would be really optimal. You can also look at the added sugars that are on here too. So for example, 4 grams is 1 teaspoon. So for this serving size, we're looking at, a little more than 2 teaspoons. So you can just sort of add it up for yourself and say, I think that's a lot of sugar for this serving. The quality of the fats is also something to consider. Many times they're using highly processed fats, and fats are used to make cell membranes and hormones and such. And so for getting those really highly processed and damaged fats, that is kind of like garbled information for our computer. So things like olive oil, avocado oil, you can find lots of products out there that are using these better quality oils. And then also added ingredients. So again, just looking, does it look like a science project? So here's an example of what I would call a processed food, or like maybe highly processed in a way. But all of these ingredients you could identify. You might not have organic acacia gum in your kitchen or guar gum, but you would have eggs, you'd have lemon juice, you'd have black pepper and garlic and chives and such. So just read the ingredients, and if there's a lot of things that look kind of strange and you can't even pronounce them, I would just look for another option. Here's an example of when we're looking at those foods that we would say are more and less associated, some swaps that you might consider. And you'll have a copy of this, so I'm not going to read through it because that would take a little bit of time. But what I've done is, you know, for things like milk, cheese, yogurt, frozen vegetables, pork, chicken, beef, you know, things that are stored in plastic bottles, sodas, you know, white pasta, ice cream, fried foods, and artificial sweeteners. I've got a few like swaps on here, and a lot of them are going to be included in that list of convenience foods too. As I mentioned before, worked at Bastyr University for many years and helped create a lot of educational material. And so that's why you'll see Bastyr at the bottom here. We've created a variety of different healthy plates, and I modified this plate for Parkinson's. So this is something you can use as a reference where we want to have probably half our plate as vegetables. We want to have whole grains and starches, and we want to have healthy fats, proteins, and then there's an aspect here that some people may or may not be familiar with, which we call digestives. And so that might be having a little bit of like apple cider vinegar or some dairy-free yogurt or pickles. So these are all different sources of fermented foods that provide nourishing bacteria for our gut. So as you're looking at your plate, if you're eating a plate of food, compare it to this and say, okay, do I have lots of vegetables? Do I have lots of colors? What kinds of grains and starches? Do I have whole grains and starches? Do I have fiber? What kind of proteins am I choosing? Am I choosing the ones that are associated with slower progression? Am I doing that more often? Am I having healthy fats, avocados, nuts and seeds, olive oil, avocado oil, things like that? Let's take a look at some specific dietary considerations for some of the needs for people with Parkinson's. One of them has to do with protein. And so levodopa is a protein-based medication. And so the amount of protein that you eat and the timing of the protein can sometimes make a difference in terms of how your medication works. So if you take your medication with or very near to a protein-rich meal, it might actually inhibit the absorption of your medication, of your levodopa, because of the protein in your food. So what we recommend is that you take your medication on an empty stomach 30 to 60 minutes before or after a meal that contains protein. Some people need to wait a little bit longer, like maybe 2 hours after a meal. It's kind of individual. Not everybody has this reaction, but in general, over time, the more protein that you eat around the time of your medication, the more that's associated with having to increase the medication over time. And so if you are feeling nauseous when you take your levodopa, you could have it with something very low protein, like crackers or rice or toast or fruit or something like that. And then there's also some evidence that if it takes a while for your medication to kind of kick in, maybe having a little bit of lemon juice or some vitamin C might be helpful just to kind of acidify your stomach and help the absorption of that, of your medication. So what foods have protein? I have stratified this into the highest levels and the lowest levels. So high, less concentrated, and least concentrated. So the highest, most concentrated are going to be things like beef, pork, poultry, fish, shellfish. So most meats are going to be in that category. Eggs, tofu, especially if you have firm or extra firm tofu, milk, yogurt, and cheese, and then protein powders, bars, and drinks. A little bit less concentrated are going to be things like legumes, nuts and seeds, nut butters, and then what we call pseudo grains, which are kind of like a seed in a grain, like quinoa, teff, and amaranth. And then least concentrated would be whole grains and starches, vegetables, and fruit. The protein, the way that you distribute protein throughout the day can make a difference, especially if you're feeling like you're off or maybe there's not a good transition between the doses of your levodopa. It is an essential nutrient, so we don't want you to just eliminate it, but we want you to think about the quantity and how you're spacing that. And some people might notice that they can feel when their medication kind of kicks in. And if that's the case, then that would be an indication that it would be okay to eat. And then some people just need to eat less protein during the day. And typically what we're looking at is about 5 to 10 grams of protein per serving. And if you're not used to thinking about grams of proteins, don't worry, a lot of people aren't. But it's worthy to start thinking about different food sources and how much they contain. So I gave you a list here of very common foods that people eat and what would account for maybe 5 to 10 grams. So like one egg is 7 grams, typically a half a cup of beans, a half a cup of things like quinoa, farro, sorghum that are a little heavier in protein, half a quarter cup of most nuts, 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. You can see the grams here. So 1 cup of cooked brown rice or oatmeal, a medium sweet potato, 2 slices of bread, 4 to 6 grams. So you can see the amounts that are in some of those foods. There's also ways that you can find this information if you're eating something like, I don't know how much protein is in a chestnut. The USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, has a very extensive food library where you can look up pretty much any food and it'll tell you how much protein is in it. You could also Google it, right? There's actually algorithms and AI that help give you that if it's one specific food. But you can also go to this website here, and I put the URL at the bottom where you could download like extensive protein lists and how much is in specific foods. And these are all labs through the US government, so they're really accurate. What it might look like for somebody who is eating adequate amount of protein, but spacing it in a way that probably, hopefully, won't interfere with medication, would be something like this, maybe 5 to 10 grams at breakfast, 5 grams at a snack, 5 to 10 grams, for lunch, and then, having like regular meals, and then a little bit more in the evening. So you might need a little heavier amount in the evening, or if you're somebody who needs to be more on at night, you might have a little bit more during the breakfast and then maybe taper that off. So it really depends on you. This is something I work with people a lot, sort of trying to customize this for your lifestyle and like what your symptoms are. So this is all in general, but I think it's a good model to start with if you are finding that your medication isn't working as optimally as you want it to. So here's an example of what that might look like. Like daytime, you might have salad greens with some garbanzo beans, some veggies, some sweet potato, maybe dairy-free feta, some avocado, whole grain crackers. So this probably is around 10 grams or so of protein. And it's also the less concentrated protein, which is a little less likely to interfere with the medication. And then maybe in the evening, you have fish tacos with avocado and lime, black beans, and salad. So that is what we would call PD Pro, or in the realm of the foods that are associated with slower progression, and also giving you just a little bit heavier protein in the evening. Another issue that I work a lot with people around is constipation. So low dopamine levels can really slow down the digestive tract. And also, there's some ways that maybe the alpha-synuclein that might be in the nervous system in the gut as well could interfere with the way that the gut functions. So a variety of different reasons why this could be a problem, but there are some multiple solutions or multiple things that you can try to see if it helps. I often will use a mnemonic that I call the 4Fs, which is fiber, fluids, flora, and physical activity. And I'm aware physical activity starts with a P, but it sounds like an F. So looking at fiber, this is when I spend a lot of time talking about fiber to people and really being a detective. I already showed you the label where you can look at that to see, okay, is my, bread that I'm eating, does it have, fiber in it? Am I getting beans? Am I getting nuts and seeds? So, oats, flax, chia, fruits, vegetables, beans, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. These are all great sources. And things like oats and flax and chia have this very kind of slippery, soluble fiber. So chia pudding is something I recommend quite a bit if you're constipated. Those chia seeds can really kind of add that gel and swell component to your gut that could be really helpful. And you can also add some fruits to it. There's also some anatomical considerations as well. So we often recommend a squatty potty. So you can see here that if you're sitting on a toilet, that can actually, block off this muscle on your rectum. And so if you do have this angle where that's not being blocked, it's a lot easier to have a bowel movement. Sometimes we're also recommending abdominal massage or heating pads on the belly, magnesium, soluble fiber supplements like psyllium. And many times if people are going a long time without, or at least more than a day, we'll usually recommend something like Miralax or polyethylene glycol. But this is definitely a conversation to have with your healthcare team, but these are some things that potentially are helpful. The dietary aspects and the fiber and the fluids are so, so important. There are some herbs that can be what we call gut motility activators. So things like ginger, anything that has kind of a bitter flavor. So maybe like turmeric or arugula, chocolate, like dark chocolate, dandelion root tea or citrus peel tea, things like that can really help with moving the gut. So sometimes we're encouraging people to add some of those things in. Probiotics, so some of those fermented foods, those bacteria can sometimes help move the gut as well. And then really focusing on hydration. And I know that that one can be challenging if you're having trouble getting to the bathroom. So that is a conversation we usually work with people sort of individually around. But know that if you do get dehydrated, it makes it really, really challenging to move your bowels. Just a few more slides here before we go to questions. I know that I covered quite a lot. And what I would recommend is taking a look at how you're eating, what you're, how you're preparing your foods. I'm thinking about, how is what you're doing similar to what I described, and maybe how is it different? Is maybe pick one thing at a time that you might want to modify. Do you want to add in more herbs and spices? Do you want to bring some bitters into your diet if you're having constipation, or soluble fibers? Do you want to add more fruits and vegetables? Do you want to do some more cooking? So think about some of these different ways or some of these different things, and make a plan so that you're thinking of it in an additive way versus, okay, what am I going to take out of my diet? When you have low dopamine, it's sometimes really hard to find motivation. And so I think a misconception for some people is that motivation is something that you wait for and then it helps you to take action. Whereas taking action can often help build motivation. So even if you're not feeling motivated, to say, all right, I'm going to take action. I'm just going to get up and make this meal, or I'm going to go and make a shopping list, or I'm going to take a cooking class. To take those steps and find that maybe your motivation might build a little bit more. And also maybe a buddy system or something to help you have some accountability with your goals can be helpful too. Thinking about what really matters to you, what are the benefits, and then if you do define, find barriers, how might you overcome those barriers? That's where your care team can be really helpful as well. So making a goal and a plan, being really specific, is important. So if you don't make something specific as a plan, most likely you're not going to follow through. So I would say, okay, I'm going to make this recipe tomorrow. Really set that goal so that you can keep moving in that direction of improving your health. There's a few resources on here for different types of different places to find recipes. Mediterranean and Mind diet, those two in particular seem to be very helpful. And Dr. Mishley just published a study showing that the Mind diet might even be a little bit better. So the Mind diet is a combination of the Mediterranean diet and what's called the DASH diet, which has been studied for hypertension, but they're both very plant-based. And I'd say the big difference between Mediterranean dietary pattern and Mind is that Mind contains more berries and more leafy greens. I have a bunch of blogs, books, and recipes for more vegan or plant-based eating. I love the Bean Institute. I just love the way it even sounds. The Bean Institute is a great website for finding more recipes about beans if you're not eating many of them. One of our past culinary directors, or the person who designed the culinary program at Bastyr University, Cynthia Lair, has a really great cooking website called Cookus Interruptus. I love it because she's an improv comedian and a chef. So there's always some like little funny thing that happens. And if you run across a video where you see the very naughty grandson, Joaquin, that's actually my son when he was little. And then there's also allrecipes.com, which has many recipes and cooking videos as well. If I didn't really touch on one other situation, which is many people with Parkinson's end up losing weight and needing more calories. And so that's something that I would recommend if you're finding that happening, that you reach out to your care team or talk to a dietitian about that. I put this reference down here, Cronometer, which is a free diet tracking software. If you ever wanted to use that, you could put in what you're eating. It will help track whether you're eating enough, and it will also help track, how you're doing on a variety of different nutrients to see if you're eating a balanced diet. If you need a break, these are some of the meal delivery services that I recommend. I do not work for any of them. I don't get any money for any of these. These are just the ones I've heard from my clients and patients that they enjoy, and they're more in that like PD Pro kind of realm. So Daily Harvest, Thistle, Modify Health, and then this one called Chef, which is a little bit newer, and it's available locally in many areas where people will actually go through some food safety training, and then they actually deliver food locally. And then for those of you who are really interested in like up and coming technology, I would recommend using ChatGPT to help with some recipes and meals. It's really great at that, actually. It can make shopping lists. Like you can look at what you have in your kitchen and put that into ChatGPT and say, can you give me 3 recipes that I can make with these ingredients? And you can also give it what we call the PD Pro list. Like, I want to eat these foods, or, don't include any of these foods. The way you interact with ChatGPT is almost like how you would speak to a person. Like, you could say, can you please give me 5 ideas for how to cook farro according to a dairy-free Mediterranean diet? Or can you provide a week's worth of meals using Mind diet principles that can be made in 20 minutes or less? And then you can ask it, can you provide recipes and a shopping list? And you can say, I don't like any of those. Can you give me 5 more? You can keep asking it to give you more and more. And it's a pretty neat tool. So that is a resource, for meal planning. You can also speak to a dietitian or, your care team about resources if you're struggling with how to nourish yourself. So hopefully this was helpful for you in terms of orienting around some of the different dietary practices and strategies for incorporating those foods that are helpful or shown to be associated with slower progression of Parkinson's. I noticed as I was talking, there were lots and lots of questions.
Do you have some questions? I'm also going to remind everyone, Calissa put in how to save your chat, but a lot of good information went into the chat. So please, if your chat is open, next to the smiley face, there's 3 dots. You can click on them to save your chat, and that will save to the files on your computer, because there were a lot of good resources. So starting with, because I asked them as they come in, you had talked about kind of the dairy. Somebody said, how can I assure adequate calcium intake? She actually does have osteoporosis. She eliminated dairy. She's taking 4 vitamins with vitamin D. What else can we do to ensure, if we're going to lessen dairy, to have calcium intake?
It's a great question, and it's so important. That's why I say, you don't want to just take something out of your diet without having a plan, especially if it's like an important source of nutrients for you. And so, yeah, calcium is found in dairy products, but you can find calcium in lots of other foods. Lots of leafy greens, nuts and seeds, legumes. If you eat, fish and animal proteins, you find some calcium there. And so what we usually recommend is, people switch onto eating some more of these types of foods. That USDA resource that I showed you, you can actually click on, there's vitamins and minerals. So you can click on calcium and see all of the different sources as well. You can also talk to a dietitian if you wanted to transition off of dairy products and make sure that you're meeting all of your needs. I will say that many of our Parkinson's patients are taking a calcium supplement. We usually don't recommend high doses because you can get some through your food. But I do think if you're not able to meet your calcium needs, that we would probably supplement a little bit too.
We had one question about, because we've heard in the past that fermented foods are good, but fermented foods like kimchi and sauerkraut are too salty. Her doctor said she could soak them to leach out some salt, but if she were to do that, would that also leach out some of the probiotic organisms?
Yes, probably. So if you do need to be careful about salt, what I would say is you could also kind of lean into some of the sources of fermented foods that maybe aren't quite so salty. So that could be things like, kefir or dairy-free yogurts, apple cider vinegar. And, if you are having pickles or sauerkraut or those types of things, I would just say eat a little bit less. You don't need like a huge quantity of it, but having maybe like a couple tablespoons so that it's not a huge portion, but you're still getting those probiotics. And then also thinking about, the salt in the rest of your food. So for example, if you're going to have a salad and you were going to put some sauerkraut on your salad, maybe, just make sure you're not putting olives on there too. Or, if you made a salad dressing, just make sure, your salad dressing doesn't have a lot of salt in it. So I would just say modify the salt in the rest of the meal when you're doing that and lean into some of the sources of fermented foods that have less salt.
One thing you had kind of talked about was more protein at night. And I didn't necessarily know if that was just because that's how most Americans tend to eat, is have the bigger meal at night. But someone had said that her husband has no appetite, so his time for feeding is more like around noon and dinner is light. Is that okay? Like, was that just kind of like you suggested more protein at night because that's how most Americans eat, with like lunch being a lighter meal, and whereas like Europeans are more likely to have the bigger meal at lunch?
Yeah. So this is, where we customize it for everybody. And a lot of it has to do, the reason why we might shift it more to the evening is because for many people, they need to be on during the day. And so we might have a little bit less protein during the day if they're needing to make sure that they have, all their dexterity. So that's where we might say, okay, at night, maybe it might not matter as much if you have a little bit of a tremor, or clearly we're going to be looking at people individually so we're not causing, any severe symptoms. When people have low body weight or they're struggling to eat, that's where we kind of shift gears a little bit and we try to maximize what people are eating when they feel good. And it might be that we maximize calorie dense foods at that lunch without lots of really concentrated protein. And then maybe there is a little bit more concentrated protein in the evening. So there's different ways to do that. For instance, you could have, you could do like corn and quinoa pasta with some garbanzo beans and veggies and put some nuts on there and, maybe have some dairy-free pesto. I mean, I'm not sure if that sounds appealing to the person who asked the question, but that would be a volume of food. It could also be calorie dense, but it wouldn't be super high protein. So there are a few different ways, I think, to manage that. And we would just look at everybody individually.
Um, Somebody had said, obviously food contributes to energy, but are there any nutrients for energy, like vitamin B6 or any of those things, like to increase energy?
Yeah. When I hear these kind of questions, I often will think of like a constellation of influences. And so when I think of energy, I think of how's somebody sleeping, how's their stress levels, how physically active are they. So if you're moving your body, if you're sleeping well, if you're doing practices that help manage stress, it's going to help a lot with energy levels. But clearly there are nutrients that are important. And as you mentioned, there are a lot of B vitamins that are very important. So we make energy in this part of our cells called the mitochondria, and it needs a lot of B vitamins. It also needs a steady stream of carbohydrates, and it needs some other nutrients too, like coenzyme Q10 and other, fatty acids and things like that. So we need to make sure people are well nourished. And, sometimes we're looking at people individually in terms of, do they need extra of a specific type of nutrient? But many of our patients are taking a multivitamin to help with making sure they're getting some of those B vitamins at optimal levels.
Question, because it would never be a Parkinson's program without constipation. If someone takes 3 tablespoons of fiber powder, is that helpful? I mean, I know from having worked with other APPs and nutritionists that it's better to get the fiber from your food than like a supplemental powder, but is it still okay that way, or?
It's hard to answer because I'm not sure what the whole situation is. A lot of times I recommend fiber supplements for people if, say, they're really struggling with, say, bloating and like gas and bloating. Because when you get your fiber from food, there's always a combination of fibers in there. And if you take a supplement, it's often like one specific kind of fiber. And I usually would recommend something like acacia or psyllium, which is very low fermentation. So if you're someone with like bloating and irritation, you don't want to put like, wheat bran or dextrin or things like that, which could cause more bloating. If someone needs just general extra fiber, it is much more enjoyable to get that from food. So it might be better to say, oh, can I find a really good, bread that has 4 grams of fiber per slice versus taking this fiber supplement, which is probably about 5 grams of fiber per serving, and have to drink this like sticky liquid. So yes, you can get it through food very easily. And if you need fiber and you're having trouble getting it, sometimes those supplements can be really helpful. And I usually choose the ones that don't have a lot of fermentation value.
Someone asked, because everyone loves coffee, is coffee good for Parkinson's patients?
Yeah, it is. I would say just be careful if you're sensitive to caffeine. It's hard to say if it's the caffeine that's helpful or, it's basically it's a plant-based food, has a lot of antioxidants and does seem to be helpful. If you're sensitive to caffeine, if you have a lot of tremor, sometimes that might make you tremor a little bit more. Maybe just do some really good decaf, or some people are doing like mushroom coffees and such, which also have a lot of beneficial properties. So generally, yes, but just be careful about the caffeine if you're sensitive.
Can probiotics improve the efficacy of levodopa?
I don't know if I've seen anything about that specifically. I mean, I feel like improving your gut flora helps so many things, but I'm actually not sure. I mean, I think having good flora in your digestive system is beneficial for your immune system. It's beneficial for, your metabolism. It's beneficial for, mental health. Some evidence that it might just help your gut produce more dopamine. But I'm not sure if it helps you with the medication or not.
Out of time today. This has been so incredible, so informative. I'm so grateful you were with us today. We have a tradition here at PMD Alliance, our wave of gratitude. Thank you so much for being here today, Kelly. This was awesome.
Thank you
to
so
everyone
much.
for being here.